What if the woman he spent 25 years controlling was the one holding the real power all along? Laura Bennett, a gentle, soft-spoken woman who dedicated her entire life to her husband, Richard Bennett. For 25 years, she raised their children, managed their home, supported his ambitions, and stayed in the background of his success. Richard, a wealthy and controlling CEO, often reminded her of her supposed place. He'd say with a cold smile, "Without me, you're nothing. You wouldn't survive a week on your own." Each time, Laura would quietly nod, hiding the storm behind her calm eyes. She wasn't loud, she wasn't confrontational, but she was listening. She was learning about money, about people, and about how easily power can shift hands. While Richard built his empire outside, Laura was building something invisible: strength, patience, and quiet wisdom. Every insult, every act of belittlement only sharpened her mind and hardened her resolve. He thought she was weak. He thought she was dependent, but she was simply waiting for the day the tables would turn. Because deep down, she knew the man who thought she couldn't survive without him was about to learn what true survival really looks like. He believed she was nothing without him. But what if he was the one who couldn't exist without her? The years had turned Richard's arrogance into something darker. What once sounded like pride now dripped with contempt. He came home late, his words sharp, his tone colder than ever. Every dinner became a battlefield, not of shouting, but of silence and humiliation. He mocked the books she read, the notes she kept, and her quiet fascination with finance. "Still pretending you understand numbers," he sneered one night, glancing at the investment magazines on the table. "Laura, leave that nonsense to people who actually matter." She smiled faintly, not to agree, but to remember. Because every time he dismissed her, she learned a little more. Every condescending laugh, every insult became another reminder. Knowledge was power, and she was gathering it piece by piece. But then came the morning that changed everything. Richard stood in the doorway, crisp suit, coffee in hand, no emotion in his face. "I'm filing for divorce," he said flatly. "The kids are grown. You'll be fine." He left the papers on the counter like she was signing for a delivery, not ending a marriage. No remorse, no hesitation. Just entitlement wrapped in confidence. For a moment, her world went silent. The man she had given everything to, her time, her youth, her devotion, was walking away without a second glance. But behind her heartbreak, something else stirred. Not desperation, not grief, but clarity. As the door closed behind him, Laura whispered to herself, "He thinks he's walking away rich, but he has no idea what I've been building in silence." The office smelled like polished wood and paperwork, the kind of place where truth always came with a fee. Laura sat across from her lawyer, hands folded tightly in her lap. His tone was cautious but firm. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett. There's nothing left in your name." He slid a folder toward her. Neat, organized, devastating. "The company owns the house, the cars, even the savings accounts. Technically, everything belongs to him." For a moment, she didn't move. It was as if the world stopped. 25 years of loyalty, erased by a signature. Her husband had planned this. Every asset shifted, every document signed in silence. While she was planning dinners, he was planning an exit. She smiled faintly. "So I walk away with nothing, then?" The lawyer hesitated. "Legally, yes." She nodded, slowly standing up. Then I suppose nothing will have to do. That night, she packed quietly. No rage, no tears, just quiet acceptance, the kind that doesn't come from weakness, but from knowing something no one else does. She took no jewelry, no clothes beyond the essentials, just one small box, old, worn, and filled with fragments of a life she once knew. Inside, a few photographs, a letter from her late father, and a USB drive, labeled only with a single word: hope. As she closed the lid, her reflection in the mirror didn't look defeated. It looked calm. Because while the world saw a woman leaving with empty hands, Laura knew better. That little box didn't hold memories. It held the first clue to her secret empire. Years before the betrayal, Laura used to wake before sunrise, not to make breakfast, but to study. While Richard slept soundly, dreaming of his next deal, she sat at the kitchen table with a second-hand laptop and a mug of coffee gone cold. She wasn't scrolling through gossip sites or shopping. She was watching the markets, learning, observing. Her husband once caught her reading an investing book and laughed. "You? Finance? Laura, please, you'd lose $1 in a wallet full of ones." She had smiled politely, closed the book, and then opened it again when he left the room. It started small, $100 here, $200 there. Leftover grocery savings, birthday money, anything she could hide from the man who demanded transparency. At first, it was curiosity. Then, it became survival. And soon, it became power. Her intuition was uncanny. Where Richard saw risk, she saw potential. Where others panicked, she stayed patient. Years passed, and her little investments began to grow. Slow, steady, unstoppable. A tech startup she believed in early went public. A piece of land she quietly bought near a developing city tripled in value. And through it all, she kept every document, every receipt in one encrypted file, on that same USB drive marked Hope. By the time Richard filed for divorce, Laura Bennett, the useless wife who couldn't handle money, had quietly built a portfolio worth millions. But she never bragged. She never confronted him, because she knew the man who thought she had nothing was about to lose everything. It started with whispers, a lawsuit here, a failed deal there. Then came the headlines. Carter Dynamics faces major financial scandal. CEO Richard Bennett under pressure as stocks plunge. The king was crumbling. Richard, once the man who barked orders and broke spirits, now sat in boardrooms, red-eyed and restless, watching everything he built sip through his fingers. Investors pulled out. Partners turned their backs. The empire he ruled with arrogance was eating itself alive. He blamed the economy, the government, his team, but never himself. Never the years of greed and pride that blinded him to the truth. Every night, he'd sit in his office, staring at numbers that refused to make sense. His assets were vanishing faster than he could move them. And each time he looked at the reports, one name kept showing up, again and again. L. Bennett Holdings. He frowned the first time, dismissed it the second. But by the 10th, his hands began to shake. "Who is this?" he snapped at his accountant. The man stammered. A holding firm, sir. Private, but unusually active. They've acquired several of our partners." Richard slammed his fist on the desk. "Then find out who's behind it." But the accountant didn't answer, only handed him a file, trembling. Richard flipped it open. On the last page, under founder and managing director. 3 words glared back at him like ghosts from the past. Laura M. Bennett. His breath caught. The pen fell from his hand. For the first time, the mighty Richard Bennett, the man who thought he could buy and own anyone, realized something terrifying. The woman he left behind wasn't just surviving. She was coming for him. While Richard spent sleepless nights scrambling to keep his empire alive, someone else was quietly writing its obituary. Laura Bennett, the woman he once called useless, was no longer sitting in the shadows of his success. She was operating inside them. Through a network of proxies, shell firms, and silent partners, she began acquiring what he was too distracted to protect. Tiny percentages, hidden votes, forgotten subsidiaries. One by one, she picked up the broken pieces of his empire, the same empire he'd built on her sacrifice. Her financial advisor would send her updates in calm, measured tones. Ma'am, your holdings in Carter Dynamics have increased to 12%. After today's auction, that's 18%. Another failed partner. We secured controlling interest. Laura never smiled, never gloated. But in the quiet of her apartment, surrounded by old photos and unpaid alimony notices, she whispered, "You told me I'd be nothing without you. Let's test that theory." Meanwhile, Richard sat across tables filled with lawyers and bankers, slamming his hand against spreadsheets. "Who the hell is bleeding us dry?" he barked. Every report, every audit led back to the same mysterious name, L. Bennett Holdings. He laughed bitterly. Some coincidence. Another Bennett. Maybe a cruel joke from the universe. But the universe wasn't joking. The enemy he was fighting, the one dismantling his fortune, erasing his legacy, wore his last name. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and defeat. Richard sat in the front row, shoulders heavy, eyes hollow, jaw clenched. Years of empire building reduced to one humiliating day. The man who once signed million-dollar deals with a flick of his pen now sat waiting for strangers to decide the price of his pride. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the room. Lot number 21, Bennett Enterprises headquarters. Opening bid, $5 million. Hands rose. Numbers climbed. Richard's pulse pounded with every offer. Not from hope, but from helpless rage. He wanted to scream, to tell them it was his name on the building, his initials carved in the marble. But the truth was brutal. He no longer owned a single brick of it. The bid slowed, going once, going twice. Then a calm, confident voice rose from the back. 10 million. The room fell silent. Every head turned. The woman stood poised, composed. Elegance wrapped in quiet vengeance. The clerk adjusted his glasses. "Name, please?" She smiled faintly. "Laura Bennett." Richard froze. For a second, his mind refused to connect the voice with the name. Then he turned, and there she was. Not the fragile wife who once begged him to listen. Not the woman he walked away from without a backward glance. This was someone reborn, unshaken, untouchable. Her eyes met his, calm and cold. And in that silence, he finally understood. The empire he thought he built alone was never his to begin with. Because the woman he left with nothing just bought everything he ever had. He stormed into the hallway after the auction, red-faced and trembling, his voice sharp with disbelief. "You planned this? All these years, how could you?" Laura turned slowly, calm in a sea of chaos. There was no anger in her eyes now, only a quiet kind of strength, the kind that comes after 1,000 nights of silence and tears. "How could I?" she repeated softly. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't need to. "You taught me to survive without you." Laura smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No," she said. "Revenge is for those still hurting. I stopped hurting the day I realized I didn't need your approval to exist." He fell silent, the words hanging between them like truth carved in stone. For the first time, he saw her. Not as the wife he controlled, not as the woman he dismissed, but as the one who'd quietly rewritten his entire legacy. She picked up her purse, turned toward the exit, and added, "You once told me I'd crumble without you. You were right. I did. And then I rebuilt, stronger than you ever imagined." The door closed softly behind her. He stood alone, surrounded by echoes of his own arrogance, realizing the real loss wasn't the company, but the woman who no longer cared to stay. Because what Laura does next won't destroy him. It'll outlive him. A morning after the auction, the headlines exploded. Bennett Corporation acquired by former CEO's ex-wife. But while the world was busy gossiping, Laura was already at work. No grand speeches, no celebration, just quiet determination. She walked through the same glass halls that once echoed with his authority, but now they sounded different. Every face that used to look down now looked up, in disbelief, in admiration, in hope. Her first order of business wasn't profit, it was people. She rehired the loyal employees he had discarded when times got tough. The janitor, the receptionist, the accountant who refused to forge numbers. When reporters asked her why, she said simply, "Because a company is only as strong as the people holding it together when everything falls apart." Meetings changed. No shouting, no humiliation. She listened, and people worked harder because of it. The toxic fear he built was replaced with trust. Under her leadership, the company didn't just recover, it flourished. Investors called it a miracle, but those who knew her story knew better. It wasn't luck. It was resilience wearing grace like armor. And one evening, as she stood in the boardroom, the same one where he once told her she was useless, she looked around at her team and said, "We're not rebuilding his empire. We're creating something that lasts, because this time it's built on respect." The applause that followed wasn't loud or forced. It was real. But what comes next isn't about business anymore. It's about legacy. And the woman who turned her pain into power the world would never forget. Years passed. The world changed. But one thing remained: the name on the building. Only this time, it wasn't his. It was hers. Laura Bennett. Every morning, sunlight hits the glass facade of Bennett Global, and her reflection appears where his once did. She walks through the same doors she used to open for him, but now people stand when she enters. There's no arrogance in her walk, no vengeance in her eyes, just calm, quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything anymore. In her private office, she looks out over the skyline, the city that once watched her break, now watching her reign. On her desk sits that same small box she carried out of their house years ago. Inside, a single wedding photo, cracked, faded. She closes it gently and smiles. "He left me with nothing. But I realized nothing was everything I needed." Because when you lose everything, you finally learn what's truly yours. Your mind, your will, your strength. She pauses, gazing at the golden letters of her name gleaming on the glass tower. He thought power was control. But real power is peace, the kind that doesn't need revenge to feel complete. Outside, employees pass beneath the new company's slogan carved in stone, built from what they broke. The woman he called useless now owns his legacy. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they said you never could.